My name is Melanie.
And my name is Brooke.
And welcome to Murder State of Mind. So if you just joined us for the first time, we are a podcast where we just go state by state discussing different true crimes that happened in that state. And today you just so happen to be joining us for Arizona. So you just got back from Arizona, correct?
I did, yes. I went there with one of my friends and we had big plans to go do a bunch of stuff, but as most, and maybe some people don't know, but a lot of the places are on fire there, so...
Oh gosh. I didn't know that.
So a lot
Even
of the trails.
like the Grand Canyon and stuff too, or?
I don't think that close, but it's more southern Arizona from my understanding.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I had no idea. And I've never really been. I had an uncle that lived there, but I never went to go visit him or anything. But I always wanted to go to the Grand Canyon. It looks really cool.
Beautiful, beautiful out there right now. But just be ready to be dying of heat exhaustion if you go so brilliantly like I did in June.
And then we were kind of talking a little bit before we started filming, but both of us really struggle bust on trying to find a really good case from this state. I don't know what it is.
We try and find ones that stand out, have enough information, and then include people that maybe you don't always see in the news, but it was really tricky to find those elements for this state.
For sure, for sure. And there was a couple that like I had thought about doing, but I'm a new mom and I can't do any type of cases that involve children. And there was one, I don't know if you saw like the dad that like bombed the house with the or no, he killed his wife and two small children, set it on fire, and then he's still like wanted by the FBI. I'm gonna put his picture down below because we need to find this evil SOB. Like he needs to be caught. And then, I don't know. So there was a bunch of stuff like that where finally I settled on the one that I have. And I don't know, I'm probably making it sound like I don't want to talk about the case I want to talk about, because I do, but it was kind of a struggle. But hey, good for Arizona. You guys don't have a whole lot of crime. So I guess that's a good thing.
We just have really specific boxes we like to tick.
You know.
And sometimes it doesn't happen.
You know. Well, Brooke, would you like to start first again?
I would love to. My story today takes us to Thatcher, Arizona in 1995. And this story is about the murder of Mary Ann Holmes. She was a 29-year-old single mother to two young children, aged 4 and 18 months. They lived in a mobile home in Thatcher, and Mary Ann had recently relocated from Chicago. She was attending a local community college and recently joined the Mormon Church. She was a dedicated mother working to better her life and the lives of her daughters. On July 9th, 1995, Mary Ann's 4-year-old daughter, Ashley, appeared at their neighbor's door. Ashley was naked, her hands were bound with rope, and she was covered in blood. Police were then called to walk upon a very grisly scene. So in the early morning hours of July 9th, 1995, Mary Ann was sleeping in her home when an unidentified male quietly entered the house from the back door. And this back door was broken at the time. That's an important element to the story. So there was no noise being made when this man came into the home. The man then brutally attacked Mary Ann. She was sexually assaulted, tortured for hours. The investigators estimated it was at least 2 hours that the man was there, and she ultimately died from her injuries. So after the neighbors called the police went over to the home and found Mary Ann had been handcuffed in the fetal position with her clothes cut off while lying in a pool of her own blood. Thankfully, the 18-month-old and the 4-year-old were both physically unharmed.
Oh, thank God. Like, my heart was pounding.
I know, that's the question that everyone's wondering. But, of course, mentally, they're really going to have a toll. Yeah. Especially Ashley, the 4-year-old at the time. And Ashley had actually sat with her deceased mother for multiple hours before she ran to her neighbors. Because, yeah, they both had seen things, but thankfully they were not injured.
Oh, gosh.
But then this puts Ashley at 4 years old in a really difficult situation, right? She saw everything that happened, so she has to be the one witness for these police officers. They have to have her relive everything she just went through. And there's actually a picture online that you can find where it's a Crayola drawing that she made of the actual scene of death, and it shows what looks to be a hatchet in her mother's head. And so it's just that, juxtaposition of childish drawing combined with a murder scene that's really, really heart-wrenching. Ashley had also stated at the time she called the killer, quote, Lion Man, unquote. So some speculate maybe this killer had shoulder-length blonde hair or some kind of lion tattoo. But, they always say whenever you are experiencing some kind of traumatic event, you never know how you're going to cope or what you're going to think about. And just in the eyes of a 4-year-old, how do you even rationalize the things that you were seeing at that time? Mm-hmm. So they did collect evidence, and at the scene they were able to collect the bloody handcuffs, rope, images of a shoe print, and that shoe print showed the estimated shoe size of the killer to be around 11 to 13. And then the police began questioning neighbors. So come to find out, Mary Ann had a yard sale the day prior to the murder. So they speculated this would have been a perfect time for any kind of criminal to kind of scope out the home and determine that there potentially wasn't a male that was living there at the time, making them easy targets in a lot of ways. So now that we have all this knowledge and 4-year-old Ashley's done everything she can to provide as much as she could, we have 3 different suspects that they're looking at pretty heavily. So the first suspect, his name is David Black. His father owned the home that Mary Ann was renting at the time of the murder, and David did a lot of the handiwork in the homes that his dad had rented. So one of the tasks he was supposed to do was fix that broken door in the back of the home. So that raised a lot of eyebrows, obviously. And in addition to that, he follows that stereotype that you see in a lot of criminals where they try and connect themselves to the case, like always being around when investigators are there.
Yeah, insert himself.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And actually, to this day, he lives in that home that Mary Ann was killed in. He resides there. So investigators have had a hard time going back to the home to try and retrace things. Of course, they have pictures, but obviously is some pushback about having them walk around his home. And another way he liked to insert himself was he did have a lot of these conspiracy theory tendencies, and he felt that since Mary Ann had just joined the Mormon church when she moved to Arizona, that it was some kind of religious killing type thing. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, just trying to have these different ideas of what it could have been when I'm sure no one really asked him. He just kind of liked to be involved. And then he did have an alibi. It turns out he was living in Utah, going to university up there. So they had some journal entries, nothing solid, but it's kind of a semi-alibi to work with. So then they moved on to the next individual, who is John Bursey. And John and Mary Ann had dated while she was living in Chicago. She relocated to Thatcher because she was scared of him. She had told multiple friends that he had anger issues and that she needed to leave Chicago because of her concern for her well-being and her children. And then, come to find out, 15 days prior to the attack, John had called Mary and made threats to harm her, and that he knew where she was living. So I actually have the call that Mary Ann placed to inform a 911 dispatcher of her concern. And we can play that.
Called me to tell me that they knew where I was, and I am a little scared because he comes to my door in the middle of the night, and then I call you guys. You know what I mean?
So both this friend and the friend's wife said he was there, and not only was he there, but he did not have any money to be able to get all the way to Arizona to commit this murder. So again, it's more of friends saying he was there and vouching for him, but it's kind of hard to make that a solid alibi. So a lot of the information I have for the story comes from a cold justice episode called Small Town Tragedy. And from 1995 to 2013, before this episode aired, it had gone unsolved. There was nothing that had come up, no new leads. So these prosecutors went to see if the DNA that was found, of course, the classic thing we hear, retest it, see if there's anything new. And so they actually did get some hits on the DNA, but unfortunately it was very, very small. So all it could do was exclude people. Mm-hmm. So it excluded those first two suspects we talked about, David and John. But it does leave us with one more suspect, the most likely of all. And his name is Philip Turley. Philip Turley is, in my head, I think of the classic quote-unquote nice guy people always talk about, you know, tries to be very doting for women and expects all these favors in return kind of thing. Mm-hmm. He worked at the community college that Mary Ann was attending, and he'd do really strange stuff, like he had a journal that he kept that mentions Mary Ann, talks about how he had this dream house plan that he laid out that had rooms for the kids, all this kind of stuff.
Creepy.
Mm-hmm. Never dated her, barely had ever spoken to her. He'd say weird stuff in the journal that I barely know her, yet my heart is all hers kind of stuff. So very, very uncomfy. So after interviewing a few of Philip's ex-girlfriends, they find out that he had told other people that he was engaged to Mary Ann, that they were going to run away together and have this happy life, even though she had no idea that he existed, kind of stuff. And these partners also explained how Philip is bipolar and he'd have episodes where he just wouldn't take his medications normally. And he had sexual deviancies that were consistent with the sexual assault injuries found on Mary Ann. So a lot of things are lining up, but again, it's circumstantial. There's nothing that specifically ties him to this case in the way of solid evidence. And even to this day, the case is unsolved. And if you watch that Cold Justice episode, they spoke with Ashley. So now Ashley's grown and she still doesn't have any answers. And the whole goal these prosecutors had were to like help her have some kind of resolution. So that was really hard to see them go to her at the end and tell her, you know, this is what we have. Unfortunately, we can't do anything.
Oh, gosh.
And just all the guilt that she has, you know, knowing that she saw who it was. And she even talks in the video or in the episode about, you know, she remembers the day before, she remembers the day after, but now that whole in between is just black. She's like, you know, there's a reason the brain protects you from it, so.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. It's a survival thing.
Mm-hmm.
The brain does. Mm-hmm. Gosh.
And it's one thing to tell people, yeah, but that guilt you live with, I can't even imagine. But there was an update on this case. After that Cold Justice episode appeared, that was back in 2013, a lot of these suspects, their name is pretty well known now, even being tied to this case, especially Philip Turley's. So he relocated to California, and so a few of his neighbors saw the episode and started saying, hey, this guy is tied to a murder, you know, as one would, they talk in the town, stuff's gonna happen. But once Philip found out about this, he went to these neighbors that started discussing it, which a 54-year-old woman and a 56-year-old man, and he stabbed both of them. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we know he has violent tendencies.
I mean, things are lining up and not looking good for this guy. So he's currently awaiting sentencing as of today's date. There is not an official say, but they're expecting it to be anywhere from 18 years to life. So, I mean, you want to hope this is the same person that's tied to Mary Ann's death, because to think of someone being free and out there in the world having committed such a terrible crime is horrifying.
Yeah. Well, I also wonder, because, you know, if you think about it, 2013 was almost 10 years ago. And just look what genetic genealogy is doing. So I wonder if now, if they're, I mean, who knows what they're working on now, but I wonder if they were to retest the DNA now, like even though it was so minuscule back then, I wonder if now with the type of technology we have, and especially if they can narrow it down to Philip Turley, and now since he's going to be going to prison, he has to put his DNA on file now. So therefore, maybe they can test it and hopefully get an answer to Ashley.
Right. Right. It's one thing to know maybe someone dangerous is outside of society now, but to know she still doesn't have concrete resolution.
Yeah,
That'd
you
be
need
nice to have for
closure.
her. Mm-hmm.
You need closure.
I agree. Fingers crossed. Genetic forensics people out there, confirm it for us.
Yes, yes, please. Yeah, maybe we should try to do like an update video or something too, where we can talk about hopefully some of these cases that do get solved that we're
Yeah.
talking about. And yeah, I hope so.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, for sure. My story begins on the afternoon of November 1st, 1996. Gary Triano, who was only days away from celebrating his 53rd birthday, had just completed playing a round of golf. With his clubs in hand, he made his way to his Lincoln Town Car. He opened the door, placed his clubs in the back, and went to start the engine. I'm sure he had many thoughts on his brain that day. What was for dinner? Should he give the kids a call? They all probably raced through his brain as he started that engine, but what he did not expect was a pipe bomb. The car exploded, sending a massive cloud of fire into the sky at the La Pomona golf course. And just like that, Gary Triano, multi-millionaire, father of 5, was deceased. So how did we get to this moment of time? To understand, we must go back to the beginning. Gary Triano was born on November 6, 1943, in Tucson, Arizona. He knew from a young age he was an entrepreneur. He graduated from the University of Arizona with an accounting degree and also attended law school. However, he quickly made his money by making businesses and running Indian casinos. He had 2 children with his first wife, Mary Ann, but the two separated in the 1990s. Gary was a single guy for a while until he met the beautiful blonde bombshell of Pamela Phillips. She was gorgeous, she was rich, and they were perfect for each other. The two quickly got married and had 2 children of their own. They lived a fairy tale of a life together. They had money and high connections, such as a certain former Orange Oompa Loompa president, believe it or not.
What? Oh, we tie in presidential now.
They were friends with old Orange POTUS. Yes,
Oh,
indeed.
boy.
They had a glorious 7 years of marriage together until it all came crashing down in 1993. Gary's wheeling and dealing lifestyle had caught up to him. He owed millions of dollars to a Las Vegas casino, $91,000 to his ex-wife, and had multiple failed businesses. He was in bankruptcy. After a very bitter divorce, Pamela moved to Aspen, Colorado, with the kids, and Gary stayed in Arizona. You wouldn't think that is where Gary's story would have ended. Another bitter divorce, moving on to the next business deal. He did end up having another girlfriend, and actually he did end up having another child. However, we know, unfortunately, Gary's life came to an end in a parking lot in that golf course. So I know what you're probably thinking. This is a rich white guy with connections. Surely this case would be solved within a day, right? Well, it actually sat cold for 9 years.
9?
Mm-hmm. For a while, Gary's case was thought to be the work of the mob. It all had the classic signs of a mob hit. It was quick, in and out job, and it was clean. Not only did the piece of work add up to a mob hit, but Gary also had connections to the mob. It turned out he was involved in a lot of seedy business deals. One of those seedy business deals in particular was with a man named McNeese. So the story behind him and McNeese was something about Gary needed to borrow money to start one of his businesses. And so as collateral, he was like, hey, I'm good for this money, but here's my wife's diamond ring as collateral, so you know I'm good for this money. So McNeese, of course, gave him the money, but then it turned out McNeese had that diamond ring looked at. Turns out it wasn't a diamond ring.
No.
So that really PO'd him off.
Understandable.
Yeah. And so then he even kind of threatened Gary's life there for a little bit. So it all kind of added up and made sense that, yeah, this could be a mob hit. However, with no solid evidence towards the mob, Gary's case sat cold. It wasn't until 2005 when 2 detectives started to look into Gary's case. They took a closer look at the so-called mob pipe bomb. Turns out it was a pretty amateur pipe bomb. They discovered it was soldered together pretty badly in that it was a remote pipe bomb. Whomever detonated the bomb had to be in close proximity and click a button. So, this once and for all took the mob theory right off the table. Because the mob, if they're going to make a pipe bomb, they're going to make a good pipe bomb. You know, it wouldn't be something that looks completely amateur.
I don't know much about the mob, but I feel like, yeah, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it right.
Exactly. So, the police were back to square one, essentially. Or were they? So I'm sure you've been wondering, what happened to Pamela Phillips? Well, after their divorce, she moved to Aspen, Colorado, as we discussed earlier. There, she picked right back up on being the socialite she felt she deserved to be. A friend was even quoted as saying, quote, "She only had one trait she was interested in when it came to looking for another man. He had to be worth at least $10 million."
Woo!
End quote. Pam had many relationships during this time, but none more interesting than with a man named Ron Yun. Apparently they became friends. I'm doing air quotes because I know you guys can't see me. And they sort of became business partners in a way. Pamela would pay Ron in cash for his help with different business avenues. However, inexplicably, in the summer of 1996, Pamela would accuse Ron of fraud, making him flee Colorado. So if you're having trouble with the timeline, summer 1996, Ron flees Colorado. November 1996, Gary Triano dies from a bomb. However, as we know, the pieces of the puzzle wouldn't be put together until almost 9 years later, due to almost entirely to the fact that Ron Yun was nowhere to be found during that time. Yun was off the map and nowhere to be found until he was arrested in Florida in 2005 for gun charges. So while under custody, the police took the opportunity to search Ron's house. Turns out that the guy was very detail-oriented, so much so that he kept very accurate and detailed records of almost everything, including his business transactions with Pamela Phillips. It was while looking through these files that the police discovered that Pamela gave Ron a rather large chunk of money in the 90s, upwards to $400,000. So, why would Pamela want her ex-husband dead? She was already rich. She made a new life for herself out in Colorado. Well, turns out there were 2 million reasons why she would be interested in something happening to her ex-husband. 2 million in a life insurance policy for Gary made out to Pamela. At Ron's house, the police also discovered audio files of Ron and Pamela talking about the murder. The puzzle pieces were further put together when an old police file put Ron in Southern California in 1996. He had abandoned a car that he had rented by himself, and within the car, they found a map of Tucson, where Ron had never been to or had ties to, several notes listing people who Gary was close to, divorce paperwork between Pamela and Gary, and finally a receipt for a local hotel in Tucson. Police finally had enough evidence to charge Ron. But what about Pamela? Pamela, by this time, in our timeline, had moved to Switzerland to be, quote-unquote, closer to her daughter who lived there. Again, I did air quotes.
Not suspicious at all, Pam.
Right. So while Pam was running about Europe, an old friend of hers was seeming like a canary at the police station. Miss Chapman, a former friend of Phillips, told a story to the cops that she says she was scared to talk about for 15 years. She said one night, Gary had supposedly threatened Phillips with a gun. It was after this encounter that Pamela supposedly said to her friend that, quote, "I should just kill him and get the life insurance money," end quote. The police felt that with Chapman's testimony, they had enough to arrest Pamela. It would take 2 long years to extradite her over to the United States to stand trial. Again, while Pamela was running around free in Europe, Ron Yun stood trial for Gary Triano's murder, and he was found guilty of first-degree murder. So, here's a frustrating thing. So once Pamela finally did get extradited back to the United States, guess what her and her lawyers tried to pull off? They tried to say she was mentally unfit to stand trial. She tried to pull the whole, I have a microchip in my brain and it tells me what to do, etc., etc., all completely bullshit.
Girl, you're the mastermind.
Uh-huh. But finally, in 2014, 17 years after Gary's death, Pamela finally stood trial. Pamela tried to paint the star witness and her ex-friend, Chapman, as less than mentally fit, saying she had a brain tumor which affected her memory. Chapman, of course, denied this. She said she got diagnosed with a brain tumor after this conversation happened. The brain tumor didn't affect her memory.
And geez, look at her blasting her friend's medical history.
Yeah, exactly. And Pamela's main defense was that Gary's death was in fact done by the mob. McNeese, to be precise, the gentleman, or I shouldn't call him gentleman, the guy we talked about earlier. Her defense also brought up points that Ron couldn't even supposedly fix a flashlight, let alone create a pipe bomb. So they tried to paint him out as just a dumbass, I guess.
Incompetent.
Yeah,
Everyone's incompetent.
Yeah.
We cannot do this.
Exactly. Then they also tried to discredit the audio files of them discussing the murder. Played the audio files in court. They played the entire phone conversation between Pamela and Ron. And during that conversation, Ron could be heard talking about his own personal medical stuff, and basically he was telling Pamela about it, but she was like, I'm not going to help you. But then later on in that conversation, they're actually talking about the murder, and then Ron says something along the lines of, well, I hope you enjoy rotting in a woman's prison. So basically they tried to discredit the audio files, saying that Ron was trying to basically paint that she's a villain when she's really not. However, after 13 hours of deliberation, the jury found Pamela guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. So, Pamela's lawyer is convinced she didn't do this, of course. He thinks it was a mob hit that she got framed for, which is very convenient because McNeese, who we talked about earlier, he died in 2005. So the guy can't defend himself and be like, no, I had nothing to do this, because he's not with us anymore. They also try to bring up, I guess, they had the pipe bomb tested for DNA, and there was a little bit of a sliver of a DNA that didn't match Pamela or Ron, but it was discredited pretty fast.
I was gonna say, wherever they bought the pieces for it, that could have been.
Yeah.
I mean, he had to have done this really soon, with all the. He pretty much left a trail for the police. Like,
yeah.
If anyone wanted to get caught, he was like making it seem like he wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense. She gets $2 million in life insurance. She gives him $400,000 for doing the hit.
Mm-hmm. Seems like a fair deal. My thing with that, though, is if they had already divorced and Gary was dating that other woman, but that maybe that was part of the divorce agreement, that she was still on the life insurance policy.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe she knew he was about to change it, and so
Yeah.
she knew she had to act fast. So my question for you is, A, do you think it was a mob hit? B, do you think Pamela did in fact do it? Or C, do you think Ron acted on his own?
Well, one, the mob scares me, so I wouldn't want to implicate the mob, because I feel like they'd recognize my voice and they come after me. But beside the point, yeah, everything I feel, just based off intuition at least, since we're experts, speculators over here, just having that kind of wealth, you get to a place where you feel like you can do no wrong, money can get you out of any scenario. Mm-hmm. So very much so, I feel like Pam.
Yeah, and I don't know who else it could be, because again, if it was the mob never gets caught, I feel like, I mean, so I really don't think, and they wouldn't do such a shoddy job of it either. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, Pamela swears up and down she was framed, but there's only so much you can do to frame somebody,
right.
So.
Just casually went to Switzerland.
Yeah, exactly, because she knew going over there would be hard to get her back to the States. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure at some point she had plans to hide even further into Europe to not be found at all, but hey, what do I know?
We're just here to give you the tease cases.
Speculation the tease, all.
What we do best.
So that is the case of Gary Triano. I hope I'm saying his name correctly, by the way. I'm assuming it's Triano. That sounds Italian.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah. But I thought it was an interesting story. Like, even though I wasn't super excited to tell it, but I mean, it has the mom, it has the rich little housewife that wants to get her money. So,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good old life insurance policy stuff.
yeah,
There's some sneaky devils out there. I think they can get
tell
away
ya.
with that.
yeah. Makes you look at your spouse twice.
Oh, don't even get me started when you watch those shows and you're like, we always thought he was so nice.
William, I'm kidding, Will.
If you made it this far into the podcast. If I ask you later and you don't mention this, it's on you. Oh.
So let's see. What's up next? Is it
Do the song in your head.
Alabama, Alaska,
Or
Arizona,
out loud. That works.
Arkansas?
Also an option.
It's always the option. So, Arkansas.
Arkansas.
Indeed.
Ever been?
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes. So, Pete, my husband, one side of his family has a big family reunion in Bella Vista, Arkansas, almost every year. We don't go every year, but we try to go every 3 months or not every 3 months, every 3 years or so. And then a friend of mine, my best friend, I should say, she has a cabin in Mountain View, Arkansas, and that we go to almost every year. So yeah.
There's a lot of Walmarts. That's my only note about.
And isn't that where Bill Clinton's from? Is it Arkansas?
Sure.
I think, yeah, because I think he was the governor there for a while too. I think. Oh God, I hope I'm not.
Wow, we're showing our brilliance. Our intellect is shining through here.
It's shine.
I feel good about that.
Yeah. Yeah, Arkansas is not too far away from Kansas, so.
So we'll go do in-person interviews then for them.
Oh, let's drive the 9 hours, or is it that long?
Casual.
I don't even know. No, I think it's like 3 hours.
I was gonna say, it's definitely not. You're on way down there. You're on way.
I think it's like 3.5 or 4 hours. It's not bad.
Well, thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much. If you liked us, please give us a like and a subscribe. If you're listening to a podcast, please give us a follow and a download. We hope to be maybe on Apple Podcast maybe pretty soon, but just staying with the small little networks for now, and then we might kind of branch out later, but any support would be appreciated.
Stay tuned. We appreciate you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Adios.